engulf the region. And later, when unbridled patriotism once more sparked ethnic fears and hatreds, Europe found itself at war again. Such bitter memories, combined with Serbia's refusal in Paris to make peace in Kosovo and a new campaign of terror, are what prompted NATO to act.
If we and our allies were to allow this war to continue with no response, President Milosevic would read our hesitation as a license to kill. There would be many more massacres, tens of thousands more refugees, more victims crying out for revenge.
NATO insists its decision to strike is designed to end Serb aggression in the Balkans, not interfere with its internal politics.
I like to emphasize that we have no quarrel with the people of Yugoslavia. Our action is directed against the repressive policies of the Yugoslav government, which is refusing to respect civilized norms of behavior in this Europe at the end of the 20th century.
U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright places the blame solely on the Yugoslav president. She dismisses any argument that NATO has no right to intervene in a sovereign state's domestic affairs.
It all started with his attacks on Slovenia. We all know his record in Croatia and Bosnia. He has no regard for international borders, and I think that his pleading that he is a sovereign country is very much like the child who killed his parents and pleaded that he was an orphan.
The fear of war spreading beyond Kosovo is what drives the Allies. Neighboring Macedonia seems at greatest risk. It's home to both Serb and ethnic Albanian minorities and thousands of Kosovo refugees. It is also a base for more than 10,000 NATO troops, making them possible targets for Serb revenge. Albright, a refugee herself during World War II, again makes the case for action.
We have an opportunity to learn from the mistakes that our predecessors made, the slowness of responding, of not dealing with wars or problems when they were small, and coming in, I think, you know, I am somebody who was liberated by Americans, but I think that if things had been done earlier, not so many lives would have been lost.
But the demoralized and underfunded military is in no real position to back up rhetoric with force, even though it does feel bound to support its traditional Serbian allies. Russia is also feeling increasingly isolated. Only 2 weeks ago, 3 of its former Warsaw Pact allies actually joined NATO. And a former Russian republic, Azerbaijan, seized 6 Russian fighter jets on its territory, believing they were bound for Yugoslavia. Russia
is now being described as a battle against genocide.
But the continued brutality and repression of the Serb forces further underscores the need for NATO to persevere. I strongly support Secretary General Solana's decision yesterday to move to a new phase in our planned air campaign, with a broader range of targets including air defenses, military and security targets, and forces in the field.
These pictures show the situation inside Kosovo itself. The NATO airstrikes are causing widespread damage here, but it's the Yugoslav forces who still seem to be inflicting the most pain. 50,000 ethnic Albanians have fled their homes in the past few days alone. The reports of massacres by Serb troops are widespread.
Whether we like it or not, we have to recognize that we are on the brink of a major humanitarian disaster in Kosovo, the likes of which have not been seen in Europe since the closing stages of World War II.
Britain's stake in the NATO campaign has now more than doubled. 4 more Harrier jets left their base at RAF Wittering in Cambridgeshire this afternoon to join 8 already in Italy. Their missions were being planned even before they touched down at their new base. 8 RAF Tornado GR1s are also being sent to bolster NATO's air power.
We are confronting...
Return safely from a bombing mission to RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire. The first plane touches down at Europe's longest military runway, its braking parachute strewn out behind. For many of the crews, combat is a new experience, firing air-launched cruise missiles at targets throughout Serbia.
You can feel when the weapon is released from the aircraft. And anytime you fly an airplane, it's inherently dangerous. The nice thing about the B-52 is that it brings a combination of between the weapons payload that we can carry and the range and speed of the aircraft, especially when you're talking about launching missiles. We can launch them from an area that puts us at less risk than some other platforms.
The planes had been in the air a little under 9 hours, beginning the mission for the first time in darkness. Ground crews who've travelled with the bombers from their base in Louisiana, working round the clock to keep the B-52s fueled and armed.
We bring enough assets with us, supplies, to pretty much fix any difficulty we have on the aircraft, and we have all the maintenance personnel pretty much we need to complete that tasking.
And tonight, another mission is in progress. A flight of B-52s loaded with cruise missiles soared into the night sky before heading east towards the Balkans.
The US Air Force has been given approval to bring even more B-52s here, supplementing the 9 already in place. It signals
in Italy and heading purposefully towards Serbia. A demonstration, if one were needed, that NATO is undeterred by its first loss of an aircraft and unimpressed by Serb defiance. Here, the government announced it was sending extra aircraft, turning up the military pressure as well as the rhetoric.
These additional aircraft and the wider action we are now planning will hit heavily at Milosevic's ability to pursue his murderous campaign in Kosovo. I don't use the term murderous lightly. We are confronting a regime which is intent on genocide.
The RAF is sending 13 more planes, including 8 Tornado GR-1s from their base in Germany, part of NATO's effort to stop what it calls the humanitarian disaster in Kosovo.
Whether we like it or not, we have to recognize that we are on the brink of a major humanitarian disaster in Kosovo, the likes of which have not been seen in Europe since the closing stages of World War II.
It's estimated more than 500,000 ethnic Albanians have been displaced, a quarter of Kosovo's entire population. For the thousands streaming across the border into Montenegro, NATO's promise of more robust action may have come too late. George Robertson will tomorrow visit the RAF pilots who may now be asked to fly even riskier missions, low-level attacks on mobile and well-armed Serb units. Kevin Dunn, ITN at the Ministry of Defence.
9 of the extra British planes deployed to the NATO action will arrive in Italy shortly. Another 4 Harriers ordered there touched down earlier this evening. They'll join No. 1 Squadron near Bari, from where ITN's Tom Bradby reports.
Events in Kosovo have forced Britain's hand. This afternoon, these 4 Harriers were on their way to join the 9 already in place in southern Italy. Here, air-to-air refuelling en route. The pilots had been on standby. Today they were in transit. Tomorrow they could be in combat. Their arrival here gives the detachment commander a little more flexibility. The strike force could now be flying sorties day and night. These men arrive here not knowing how long this is going to go on or exactly what missions they'll have to fly. But phase 2 of this campaign may well include low-level flying, perhaps even during daylight hours, and that carries greater risks. It's not clear if the new pilots have flown in combat before. Certainly for those already here, the last few days have been a baptism of fire. They admitted privately today it was sobering to see the first plane go down, but they said it was hugely encouraging that the pilot had been so efficiently and quickly rescued.
We don't underestimate the threat, it merely underlines the threat. We don't know actually how the aircraft came down at this stage, but it's actually very reassuring that the pilot was got out safely very quickly, so that's been very reassuring to our people.
It wasn't just Harriers that came in today. The Hercules transport plane brought in more equipment. But other than that, it's been a quiet weekend. The last mission was on Friday night, and that's not good for the pilots. They said today, too much waiting around means too much time to think. Tom Bradby, ITN, Southern Italy.
In the mountains, Serb soldiers emerged from cover along the Kosovo border. Their positions now being strengthened and reinforced each day. They've also brought forward more armour to within a few score metres of the frontier. Hidden in the trees covering the border crossing, another Serb tank. On the road from Pristina below, movement is mostly arriving Serb military. These are Serb sappers checking minefields laid along the border within the last few days. One exploded during the night. Against the Geneva Convention, the minefields are unmarked and appear to cover the length of the border here with Macedonia. The positions that we've seen the Serbs take up today would seem to be of a defensive nature. That in itself suggests that they are prepared to resist any NATO advance. And every once in a while, a little convoy of civilians travelling the well-worn trail of misery. A quarter of Kosovo's Albanian population has been displaced, the numbers increasing daily. Many have crossed the mountains into Albania. Whatever they bring with them is outweighed by everlasting fear. It'll take some time before they realise they are the lucky ones who've escaped what now seems to be a programme of removal and sometimes extermination. And the young men and husbands are mostly missing. NATO's border patrols seem more frequent now, but it's not the Serbs who are coming, it's the people this operation was mounted to protect. Colin Baker, ITN, on the Macedonia-Kosovo border.
Launch a rocket grenade. Moments later, a dramatic shootout with police on a busy city centre street, all captured on amateur video. No one was hurt, but several bullets hit the embassy.
A further 4 aircraft, and we know, as you were saying, that they've already arrived. In addition, there's 2 TriStar tankers out there, a third on its way, which took those aircraft out. And then we've also got 8 Tornado GL1s coming from Germany, from RAF Bruggen. There are going to be 3 AWACS aircraft still out there. Now that's quite a force. We've rather crowded that picture there to demonstrate that there is quite a commitment now from the British. We tend to look at it and say, well, we're the poor relation. The Royal Air Force is doing a lot because, remember, there's a squadron in Kuwait, there's a reinforced squadron in Saudi Arabia, there are aircraft in Incirlik in Turkey, all doing the no-fly zone in Iraq, and Britain has other commitments around the world, places like the Falkland Islands. So a lot of commitment that's going on now from the British. That came in today. This is the 4 aircraft Harriers going out. They left RAF Wittering this morning. There's the TriStar tanker. The TriStars can also carry all their equipment out. This is a really difficult activity, actually in-flight refueling. That long probe there, and to the right you can see the nozzle which connects the fuel. The moment it makes contact, the fuel flows. When it breaks, the fuel stops. And after a long flight, these pilots are having to work quite hard and doing navigation and other duties when they're going down, and having to then refuel in flight, probably twice, I would imagine. But it's a nice view there to see the aircraft together. You don't often get that opportunity to see that many aircraft. Sadly, this is in a war situation that we're seeing them. But the Harrier, and you can see a beautiful view of the nose there, and those bumps on the nose are all its new night vision equipment. And there's the flight deck of the TriStar tanker, and there's one of the pilots of the Harriers going out.
So clearly, they...
Part of the job, drilled into pilots until it's reflex. What happens the first few minutes after a pilot goes down in hostile territory goes a long way towards deciding his fate.
Upon getting on the ground, they try to get away from the aircraft, and then they look for hide sites, and basically, as the name would imply, escape and evade.
Now's the time to gather your thoughts, recall your training, your briefings, and your evasion plan of action, or EPA.
It's military training like this that helped Scott O'Grady evade capture for 6 days after being shot down over Bosnia in 1995.
Jumped into a quick hold-up point, and then must have been, just a couple of minutes to where I could hear where people were at the parachute, followed by just a few brief minutes after that, people were walking right by me.
Training, luck, and wits kept O'Grady alive, ingredients every NATO pilot in trouble will need. The Geneva Convention is designed to protect downed pilots, but the Pentagon is prepared for the worst.
We have significant assets pre-positioned in the theater for getting pilots back, and obviously our first effort would be along the lines of what we did to get Scott O'Grady back.
The effort's a sophisticated one. It begins in earnest once a pilot's been located and his position confirmed through a radio beacon all NATO pilots carry. That's when specially trained rescue teams are dispatched in assault helicopters like this CH-53 Super Stallion that went in to get O'Grady out.
They can fly day or night. They fly very low to the ground. They have extended range on them. They carry extra fuel bags so they can go further.
For the Pentagon, the goal is a scene like this one, a pilot safe and surrounded by loved ones. For a pilot, the trick is never having to deal with this at all. Jonathan Aiken for CNN, Washington.
They show a series of explosions there, in line with NATO's declared intention of pounding Serb ground forces, said to be conducting a genocidal campaign against ethnic Albanians. A major
whatever measures are necessary, even reluctantly introducing ground forces, if that is the only way to accomplish it.
Others say, not yet.
It's only been 5 days. Now, I know there are terrible things happening in Kosovo. There are a lot of people talking about ground forces. Let's continue the air assault.
President Clinton is still selling his Kosovo policy to a skeptical American public. Any attempt to introduce U.S. ground forces into the troubled region could be a hard sell. Jean?
Off for souvenirs. The pilot was rescued by American search teams. NATO today admitted that a plane had crashed, but didn't say why. Sky's diplomatic correspondent Tim Marshall reports from Belgrade.
A moment of triumph for the civilians of Budjanovci village. They are sure the American stealth jet was shot down. Whatever the circumstances, there's only one explanation here. This man said he saw the plane hit, then there was a flash and an explosion. Another man described seeing the aircraft going down. He ran towards the wreckage, but the army arrived and told him to keep away. Today, Serbian television is showing pictures of the wreckage burning shortly after the plane came down. The rest of the fuselage was found about 4 kilometers away. One local said they'd found the pilot's weapons, but not him. One villager told us the plane was traveling from west to east. Above the village, it burst into flames, did a U-turn, and then crashed in the fields. The wreckage is spread over a large area. The authorities will try and gather as much as possible and then examine it in detail. In Belgrade, there was an anti-war demonstration with up to 10,000 people attending. The population, pro or anti the Yugoslav government, is deeply angry about the bombing. The vast majority blame President Clinton. Back out in the countryside, villagers were tearing strips off the plane as souvenirs. Its black, plastic-like material and lightweight, honeycombed interior fascinating them. A boy too young to understand irony stood on the wing of this broken symbol of American power, wearing a Chicago Bears hat. His mother tried to persuade him to give the three-fingered Serbian victory salute. Tim Marshall, Sky News, Budjanovci, Yugoslavia.
Related to a new level of violence. Jill Doherty is in the Russian capital.
There were about 1,000 anti-NATO protesters outside the U.S. Embassy, a smaller crowd than usual. Suddenly, a white car drove up.
I just happened to be looking at this white car standing here when a man in camouflage gets out, and I said, look, he's going to start firing.
The man in camouflage clothing raised a rocket-propelled grenade launcher to fire at the embassy. Police say the launcher apparently malfunctioned. Witnesses say the man grabbed another launcher. Police opened fire with pistols. The man jumped into the car and fired back with an automatic weapon. 7 or 8 bullets hit the embassy. U.S. officials said no one was hurt. The car sped away. Police recovered 2 grenade launchers left behind by the shooter. Police, Federal Security Service troops, and police special forces were beefed up.
You can see that we pushed most of the people away from the embassy. People are now located a good distance away, and the police are guarding the embassy.
Anti-NATO demonstrations have been taking place day and night in front of the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. They have turned violent, with ultra-nationalists and young skinheads fueled by alcohol, breaking windows, throwing bottles, eggs, and ink at the building, located on one of Moscow's busiest thoroughfares. This is not the first time the U.S. Embassy has been fired on. In September 1995, a rocket-propelled grenade was fired, destroying an office. No one was injured. That attack came after the Kremlin accused NATO of genocide against the Bosnian Serbs. Russia's interior minister says police prevented a most dangerous political provocation, the consequences of which could have been irreversible. The Russian Foreign Ministry apologized to the United States for the attack. President Boris Yeltsin ordered an investigation. Jill Doherty, CNN, Moscow.
Secondly, all of our F-117s have a pilot's name on the canopy rail. That does not mean that that pilot is the only individual that flies that airplane. That's the one that's assigned kind of his baby to look after when it's back here at home station, and is separate and distinct from who would fly that during a particular mission. Obviously, we don't go up and paint the airplane with a new name on it every time a different pilot gets in it.
General, Channel 9, El Paso. Were the search and rescue personnel who carried out the rescue, were any of them from Holloman?
As you might recall, our search and rescue forces have departed Holloman. We don't have any more assigned to Holloman. At this time, I do not have the names or the particular unit that accomplished the rescue. If I look back at the experience and the proficiency and the talent and the skill of the 48th Rescue Squadron and when they were here, I'd certainly say there's probably a good chance that they could have pulled that off, but I don't have an answer for that right now.
Were the Air Force or from...
It is day 5 of Operation Allied Force, and airstrikes against Yugoslavia are intensifying. NATO launched more than 50 warplanes from the base at Aviano, Italy this afternoon. They are going after Serb forces who are carrying out what one NATO official calls genocide against Kosovo Albanians. The pilot of a downed U.S. warplane is returned safely to Allied territory with only cuts and bruises. And as all this is happening, 3 Russian politicians, including a former prime minister, have arrived in Belgrade on what they say is a peace mission. On the ground in Kosovo, Serbian troops are reported to be routing ethnic Albanians from villages and now cities, sending a flood of refugees across the borders into neighboring Albania, Montenegro, and Macedonia. The NATO bombing was intended to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe, but as Alan Pizzi reports, it may have, at least for the time being, worsened it.
This is what NATO bombing has won so far, a long, dismal line of refugees driven from their homes by the Serbs. Over the weekend alone, 14,000 ethnic Albanians fled Kosovo, according to the UN Refugee Agency. They took all the men and killed them, this woman says. They put pistols on people's throats and said, "We will not allow your children to see Kosovo. We will kill you all." The Serbs appear to be ethnic cleansing on a monumental scale. Reliable reports from Pristina say leaflets signed by the Serb prefect of Kosovo order all ethnic Albanians to leave for Macedonia. There are also credible reports that ethnic Albanian men who worked for humanitarian relief agencies and the international monitors are being hunted down. Refugees crossing the Macedonian border today had hidden for days before taking the chance of making a run for it. Even safely across the border, they were afraid to be identified.
What sort of things happened?
They are collecting people during the night, killing them, slaughtering them.
Only NATO ground troops, he says, can save Kosovo.
And if no troops come, what will happen?
Only mighty God knows that.
What do you think?
They will kill plenty of Albanians there.
And NATO bombings haven't stopped the Serb offensive against Kosovo Liberation Army guerrillas, according to a spokesman reached by satellite telephone.
We are still fighting. We have ammunition, but we don't have enough to take them back, to break them.
Refugees have so little left, they are reliant on charity for food. But that's still better than being trapped in Kosovo. Alan Pizzi, CBS News, Skopje.
Airstrikes against Yugoslavia are in what NATO is calling Phase 2, now targeting Yugoslav tanks, troops, and weapons. On the last day of Phase 1, yesterday, the Serbs scored a propaganda coup when a high-tech American stealth fighter went down. David Martin at the Pentagon reports the celebrating may be short-lived.
F-117 stealth fighters took off again from Italy this evening as NATO launched a 5th night of strikes which NATO officials vowed would do serious damage to the Serb army.
We are increasingly switching our attention to the military thugs who are causing such misery and suffering directly at Milosevic's orders. and let them get this message, because we are going to hit them hard.
The stealth fighter that went down last night appears to have been hit by a Serb anti-aircraft missile. It was the first stealth aircraft ever lost in combat, but the pilot was rescued.
He's in great shape. He's back in a NATO facility right now and continue to carry on with his military duties.
The primary military duty is to keep up the bombing until Serb President Milosevic cries uncle.
We intend to continue